the scene of the crime. A crime of passion, filmed in a way you have never seen before, and as no one else would dare attempt. But the screen's master of suspense, the producer-director who shocked the world with This is the apartment of a man named Jeffries, a news photographer whose beat used to be the world. Right now, his world has shrunk down to the size of this window. He's been watching the people across the way. Nobody seems to pull their blinds during a hot spell like this. He knows a lot about them by now. Too much, perhaps. For instance, down there on the second floor, the woman pacing about. He calls her Miss Lonely Hearts. So lonely that even death seems like a friend. These are the newlyweds on a honeymoon no one will ever forget. He calls her Miss Hearing Aid, an artist of a very odd and strange art. The songwriter who plays the same melody over and over again. This is the traveling salesman and his invalid wife. Out of their arguments and nagging comes a weird kind of love. Miss Torso, the body beautiful. That is, viewed from a safe distance.
Those are just a few of my neighbors. First I watched them just to kill time, but then I couldn't take my eyes off them, just as you won't be able to.
And you won't be able to take your eyes off the glowing beauty of Grace Kelly, who shares the heart and curiosity of James Stewart in this story of a romance shadowed by the terror of a horrifying secret.
Hello everybody, welcome to episode 16 of Film Gold, and this is the first appearance on the podcast of, well, two people. First of all, Alfred Hitchcock. Yeah, that wasn't quite what I was about to say anyway. But also the first appearance on Film Gold of Matt Williamson from the Pop Goes the 60s YouTube channel. Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thanks for having me on your podcast as well, on your YouTube channel. Can you introduce your channel? I know it's not film, it's actually music, but tell us about that.
Yeah, so Pop Goes the 60s is my YouTube channel, and it's focused on 60s music with a focus, I guess you would say, on the Beatles. But it's also 60s pop culture, so I do venture into films a little bit, but it's mainly music. And there is a little overflow of that 60s decade into the 70s and into the 50s as well occasionally. Yeah. So this is somewhat within the pale.
Fantastic channel, by the way. Not just saying that because I've been on there. No, it's a really, really good channel and becoming very popular as well. When I was on there, I couldn't believe the number of comments, hundreds of them.
Yeah, people, they like to get involved in these discussions, I think, which is, I think, why podcasts are so popular now.
Absolutely, yeah, they're massive, aren't they? More competition, unfortunately, for me. But I've got three. I've hedged my bets a bit. Anyway, so the film today is Rear Window from 1954, Alfred Hitchcock, as I said. What's your relationship with Hitchcock and with this film in particular? I mean, how many times have you seen it? When was the first time, if you can remember?
Well, one of the things I say about this film, whenever I'm asked what is my favorite anything, I usually don't have an answer. But if you ask me my favorite film, I say Rear Window, and I've been saying that since I was 20 years old. I saw it first when I must have been about 19, and I got into this Hitchcock phase in college, and I just started watching old films. Much like I listened to older music, my decade for music is more the 60s, but my decade for film would be the 40s and 50s. And as a child, the Technicolor films were shown on Sunday afternoons, and I remember that being kind of a backdrop of my life, much like AM radio was a backdrop in many of our lives. So I as a college student, Hitchcock was extremely easy to fall in love with, and I started to just eat up all of his films.
What are the other ones that you'd put up there with his best?
Well, I would say Notorious, North by Northwest, The Birds, Rope. I would say Vertigo is just a work of art on epic proportional levels. So that's another one.
Strangers on a Train is a big one for me. I love that one. I guess all his films have themes, but I like the ones that have those really quite overt themes. And we'll get to it, but obviously this film has a very, very clear theme. A few really, but one that really leaps out. What are the other films from the 40s and 50s that are non-Hitchcock that you'd say are up there with your favourites as well?
Yeah, well, I'm a big film noir fan. The reason that is, I mean, as opposed to Hitchcock, which is such a British point of view, although he was very Americanized in the 50s, the film noir is kind of the dark underbelly of American culture, post-World War II. So, the movies like Maltese Falcon, Out of the Past, Laura, some of those early Kubrick films, I really am into those quite heavily.
Yeah, there's a film called The Killing by Kubrick, if you know that one.
Love it.
I need to plan right now, but we could well end up doing that one. All right, we've got a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. I'll just describe the opening scene. So we get this jazzy, very upbeat score. We get this scan of the courtyard, this incredible set. And I was watching something last night, and I won't repeat everything they said because it was too much to go into, but it was incredibly elaborate, and it just works fantastically well. And then we get all these characters. We get Miss Torso, we get the songwriter, we get the newlyweds, we get Miss Lonely Heart, the salesman and his wife, and then we get the couple with a dog who sort of provide both the comedy and the tragedy in the end. And then Hitchcock does this very economical thing where we'll call him Jeff, Helby Jeffries, James Stewart, with his broken leg, and then we see photos of the accident because we find out he was photographing, I think it was a racetrack, a race. And of course, he is us through the film. We get his POV shots. I'll just go quickly through the actors. So James Stewart, Grace Kelly, Thelma Ritter, who is Stella. Wendell Corey is the detective. And then Raymond Burr, of course, famously Perry Mason. What do you think about these the characters we see?
Yeah, so the characters across the courtyard, film buffs may recognize this as almost a silent film that you're watching across the courtyard. You faintly hear some of what they're saying, and you can make out some of the words, but oftentimes you're just viewing like little silent movies in each window. And I think Hitchcock does a wonderful job of setting those characters up, and he does it with comedy as well.
Obviously, we do hear them speaking, but we don't hear them speaking to him.
Correct.
Other than Lars Thorwald.
And the set you mentioned, I think this is one of the greatest sets ever made. It's very difficult to show as much as they did from the viewpoint of Jimmy Stewart's rear window, because we really don't ever leave that room. And you have to see everything from that perspective. One other thing I like to mention, you had mentioned the opening. One of the great things about Hitchcock is he tells the story of L.B. Jeffries laying there in the cast, and he just pans around the room, and it tells you why he's in the cast, how he got the broken leg, and what his profession is, all in a very long pan of his inside of his apartment, which is incredible filmmaking, I think.
What they might have done in a modern film is they might have had him, you do hear him talking to his boss, but they might have done it where he would have had a really obvious conversation where he would have mentioned all these things. So they kind of avoided that. Like you said, we get a quick scan. I did find out, just watching a couple of documentaries, that they did actually plan to film a scene in his boss's office.
Oh, yeah.
But very wisely decided against it because, of course, we need to be in this courtyard the whole time.
Yes.
That's the whole point of a limited setting film. It doesn't really work if suddenly you're in the office for no reason. So, it's really clever. And I like they have... so they cut to his leg and someone's written, "Here lie the broken bones of L.B. Jeffries." So there's a bit of humour throughout. And one of the first characters we meet is Stella, who's the nurse, who I think is a wonderful character. And I'm sure I've seen Thelma Ritter in many other films, but I just can't.
Yes, her first film was Miracle on 34th Street. She was already older, but she's a famous scene stealer. Similar character in every film, but she's always, she can deliver a line like nobody's business.
Yeah, absolutely. So she plays this, I guess, working class. She kind of identifies that she says, maladjusted misfit or not very educated or something like that. Mm-hmm. But she's got a nice line in Homespun Wisdom, and I like the line where she quotes something in James Stewart says, yeah, that was Reader's Digest, 1939 or something. It's some good banter between them. But there's this interesting thing where she says she predicted the Wall Street crash because she was nursing the head of General Motors, and because his blood pressure was up or whatever it was, she predicted that something was going to happen. I love that idea. And then she makes a really interesting point She says something about, when I met my husband, in my day, we just met someone we liked and we got together. We didn't sit around analysing each other. So it's interesting. I think if you look at any point of history or any film, they'll always be talking about the modern age, about how life is going faster. You know what I mean? And when there was the 100th anniversary of the Titanic disaster, someone bought me the original papers. Not the original copies of the original papers. And in there they were talking about the pace of modern life. We've always been talking about that. It's not just now,
Mm-hmm.
And she says, we become a race of peeping Toms. So do you think we've become a race of peeping Toms?
Very much so now. Look at in really the turn of the century, 21st century, when all the so-called reality TV kicked in. Now it's not that it's reality, but people want to see other people's lives, and they'll tune into it and watch it for hours.
Yeah, because another theme of this film actually is people watching other people's lives but not really getting involved in them.
Yeah.
Jeff would say he's got an excuse because he's got a broken leg, so he can't move. Mm-hmm. But I do like that theme, and then we'll get to it later with the lady whose dog dies. She has a very telling speech to the rest of the neighbours, but we'll get there. So then we get Lisa, we get Grace Kelly, and I guess another theme of the film is that Jeff is obviously an adventurer. He lives on his wits. I guess he's unmaterialistic. He doesn't accumulate possessions. And Lisa, she works for a fashion magazine. Is that right?
Yes, I believe so.
There's one line where he says, don't you ever have any problems? She's perfect, but she's too perfect for him almost. What do you think about this interesting thing they do where she's competing for his attention with the neighbours? Did you notice that?
Yes. As Stewart starts to really get more involved in what his neighbours are doing, it's almost like what we just alluded to, people, we become a race of peeping Toms. It's contagious. It's almost compulsive to watch the actions of somebody else when you know that they don't know you're watching.
Yeah.
So I think in many ways her perfection is predictable to him. And what's out in the courtyard is not predictable, and that's what draws his interest.
Yeah.
As beautiful as Grace Kelly is, and she's maybe too beautiful for him. That may be one of the problems with this film. It's minor, but her beauty is so great. She's Grace Kelly, and yet he's not that interested.
Yeah, do you think that's a little bit unbelievable?
People have said that to me as an issue with the movie, that it's not believable that she would be with him. He's not attractive enough. I think actually his profession may be a little bit too rugged for her. I don't know. It's not the focus.
I think there's a class element, because I think we can kind of say that she's upper class. Stella is very working class. This would be much huger in an English film, let me tell you about it. Of course, the director is English.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, I guess, I don't know, middle class maybe, let's say. So maybe there's an idea that different classes just don't mix. I think she likes the fact that he is rugged. And
well, not only that, but he's a creative as well. So he's a top photographer who plays by his own rules, and he's the best in his class, really. So there's an attraction there, I think, as well.
Yeah. How old do you think he's supposed to be?
That's a good question, because 1954 is the film, so Stewart would have been in his later 40s. He's probably supposed to be early 40s.
I don't know, the way people relate to him, he seems a lot younger, but then he definitely looks 45 or whatever he is.
Yeah, James Stewart reached a point at about 53, 52 when he started to look older. He could play a younger guy prior to that, but then, age just started to catch up with him a little bit.
Yeah, because when they're having one of those conversations about their life, she basically intimates that he should leave the magazine and she can get him fashion assignments.
Yeah.
And I could see that would not work at all.
The fact that she would even suggest that shows the chasm between them, and maybe the age is part of that. She says, I'm not the girl I thought I was. She knows she's beautiful, and she knows she's from a certain cloth, and she still can't get him.
Yeah. All right. We'll kind of move through the plot in a general way. So he starts watching the neighbours with amusement. I think we get lulled into a bit of a false sense of security, because at the beginning it's mostly amusing and there's little bits of humour here and there. But gradually he's just watching these dramas, playing out in their lives. So we see the salesman, which is obviously Raymond Burr, goes out in the rain with his sample case, and then suddenly Jeff has got binoculars and the long lens. He's got the long lens out.
Yes.
He's saying, I'm a photographer. He's got an excuse, I suppose. And then Stella says, be careful, you're looking for trouble. And I think that's what James Stewart's looking for, isn't he? He's looking for trouble because he's bored.
Yeah, I think that was his 6th week, stuck in there in that cast, and he's just bored, and he's looking for any kind of excitement.
Yeah, that's it. Again, I was listening also to someone who's, I think they're a Hitchcock biographer, and they were talking about what he's seeing is a bit like us watching the cinema screen, you know, because it's sort of passive entertainment. He's not really getting involved other than the salesman. So the film kind of works like that as well. It's a reflection of us as a viewer. One of the things I absolutely love about it is that, did you notice that other than that jazzy music, there's not really any score? All the music comes from people listening to things on their radio, I think. That's the impression I got.
Pretty darn near. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the score because it's essentially almost a slab of music concrete where you're using ambient noises from Greenwich Village to build your soundtrack. And you're right, the radios that are playing across the courtyard, one song I believe is Dean Martin's That's Amore.
Yeah.
That's part of the whole ambiance that we as voyeurs are, you know, surrounded by. And I really love how he did that.
Oh, it's brilliant. And then we get Bing Crosby singing To See You Is To Love You.
Was that Crosby singing that?
Yeah, that was Crosby, yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds lovely, yeah.
And getting back to one of the people across the courtyard, the composer, who's struggling to write a song. We can hear him writing the song throughout the whole film. It's a little bit like the Beatles Get Back, where we see the process of songwriting, you know. And the process of him writing that song affects the other people in the courtyard.
Absolutely, yeah. Particularly at the end. We will get there, but yeah. And thanks for mentioning the Beatles. Good stuff. I try and mention them as much as possible. Yeah, we get this lovely piano version of Amore. Then we get Bing Crosby, as I said. And you kind of realize where To Know Her Is to Love Her probably came from as well.
Could be, yeah.
You know, because it's very, very similar. And then obviously the songwriter working on this song produces a score. And then you hear someone practicing their scales. They're singing along with the songwriter, I think.
Yes.
And then you get, this sort of ambient noise. Another thing I love is that you just get a little shot of the alley. You know, when they go through the alley and you can see life going on.
Yeah, that shot of the alley. Just the way the camera work is pacing to catch all these motions in this neighborhood going on. And there's some very long sweeping camera movements that see what you just suggested. So you're seeing in front of the building, you know, we're looking at the back of the building. Well, how do we know what's going on in front of the building? It gives us that little sliver of the alley that not only shows you the street, but the bar across the street as well, which we'll get to.
Yeah, you get the bar, and then you just get little shots of people walking to and fro. I love that. Actually, I have a little bit of a story from Rear Window. I used to get occasional bouts of tonsillitis when I was younger, partly because I used to smoke quite a lot as well. Don't do that anymore. I remember I'd been ill for about 3 or 4 days, and you know when you're really ill and you can't leave your house, you have that kind of spaced out feeling. You know, you haven't left your house for 4 or 5 days, and you are kind of in this bubble. you stay in your room or wherever it is. And I remember after about 4 days, I'd also been sleeping a lot, and I had like some like a 2-hour nap in the afternoon or something. And I came downstairs, and this was when I was living with all my family. I was probably only about 17 or 18, and I actually thought it was 8 o'clock in the morning, but it was actually 8 o'clock at night because I was that spaced out. And this film was on, and I'd seen it, and I ended up watching it with my family. And it's funny how sometimes you just identify with things. And suddenly I just had this extra awareness of maybe how he felt. He's not ill as such, but he's injured. And I always remember that little shot of the alley. I love it. Seeing the world go by, because I was kind of like that. I'd been in bed for 4 or 5 days, and I'd occasionally look out my window at the street, you know, and you just see a little snippet of life. By the way, how many times would you say you've seen this film?
You know, I probably have seen it 25 times. I've seen it on the big screen, I think, at least 3 times. It's been re-released a couple times. And there's a film house that used to play old films back in the 90s. I used to go every week for it was like $2. It was so cheap. But I've seen it at least 25 times. Yeah,
I've probably seen it about the same, to be honest. I tended to watch films a lot. Did you ever do this, like record a film off the television and then just watch it to death? I mean, I was terrible for that, you know?
Well, that's how I first watched this. When I came home from college, they were showing North by Northwest in the lunch area in the evening, and I was studying for an exam. And I was not able to study for the exam. I just watched North by Northwest. So then I went home, and my dad, who had been recording old films from television, he's the one that had Rear Window recorded. So I started watching the old films that he had recorded.
Did you tend to watch old films when you were a kid? Or?
Yeah, you didn't have much choice. I mean, when I was a kid, I mean, like I was saying on Sundays, you typically had a black and white, like a serial type of film on, like a Charlie Chan or Mr. Moto or something. And after that, it was followed by a Technicolor film, the feature. Yeah. So you didn't have a lot of new movies on during the daytime. It was all old movies. You know, I mean, they were on in the background if I wasn't watching them closely. They were there.
Yeah, I got into 50s sci-fi when I was about 12 or 13. But, you know, sometimes, I don't know what it was like where you grew up, but kids will sometimes make fun of you if you like old stuff, you know? Because, you know, when you're a kid, people are so focused on, and everything has to be modern, right?
You know, for the old films, I mean, most of us grew up watching that stuff because, like I said, that's all that was on. In those days, you didn't have 24-hour programming. I mean, the programming typically stopped around midnight. You might on the weekends have like a feature film, like a late show and a late show. And then in the mornings, you didn't have any television until about 5:30 in the morning. Yeah. So I'm a little older than you. So maybe it was just more normal for us kids to have watched that on television.
Yeah, maybe. I was thinking when I was 12 or 13, I had a friend whose mother had it was VHS in those days. She had original ones, and then she'd tape stuff off the telly, and I just developed, you know, a taste for it. But I don't remember anyone else at my school really doing that. And I used to, when I bought these 50s sci-fi ones, I used to have to hide them when I went to school and stuff, because people would make fun of me and go, "Oh, what are you watching that for?" You know.
Yeah, in high school, I wasn't watching old films much then, so I was listening to old music. So that was kind of similar. You know, you get kind of looked at strangely. What do you listen to that for? What, you don't like Van Halen? You know, things like that.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels like kids there's almost a stigma against absorbing anything that's not modern. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
But I just lapped it up. You know, I used to love all these old films. The more obscure, the better as well. Just going back to the plot. So another interesting thing that happens is that I think Lisa, Grace Kelly, is telling him, you know, "Oh, why are you looking out the window? You know, there's nothing going on. There's nothing happening with a salesman." What does she see that makes her interested in the case? Can you remember? Is it the trunk?
Yes, it is the trunk. So as the film switches from talking about the love story between James Stewart and Grace Kelly, all the while he's looking out the window and interested, he's not connecting the dots until that first night. And then he's telling her, and she's like not having any of it, because James Stewart is suggesting a murder happened, though he didn't see it. And then she's trying to dissuade him, saying, "Hey, no, that's private out there. Doesn't mean anything." And then she starts to get sucked in. It's like the drama of what is across the courtyard is pulling her in. And it shifts from the discussion of their relationship, which seems to be at an impasse, to something equally or more sexy and more titillating, what's going on across the courtyard. And that titillation is what ultimately brings them closer together.
This might be my kind of overactive imagination, but it also seemed like he became sexually interested in her because she was interested in the case.
Yeah, you're not reading too much into it at all. I think the point of it is that it is arousing to be a voyeur of something that you're not really a part of. Yeah. And when she joins him in that is when he starts to get aroused by her.
But you wonder, what's been going on in their relationship before he had a broken leg? I'm wondering. Well, maybe I'm being too voyeuristic now, but you have to wonder, like, he seems a bit... Anyway, let's not go there.
I had a joke to tell, but I'm not going to go there either.
If you want to go at any point later, just throw it in there. And then we get Doyle, Wendell Corey. Again, a great character. I love the banter. He's skeptical. He's a little bit seedy in a way. Yeah.
Wendell Corey was an actor that they tried to put over as a leading man, and he just wasn't good looking enough, but he's got this great booming deep voice, and he works better as a character actor. And his banter with James Stewart is just great. They could have done another film together. They were old war buddies, and that's how he pulls them in. You know, he's doing a favor for a buddy by coming over and checking out, is this really a murder? No cop would do that unless you knew him.
Yeah. But I wrote down some great lines. He says, "Do you need anything, Jeff?" He goes, "Yeah, you might send me a good detective." And then Jeff says, "Are you interested in solving this case or making me look stupid?" He goes, "Well, ideally both."
Yeah. Yeah, so they're all buddies, and they can rib each other that way and stick it to one another and not take it personally.
Yeah, because Doyle kind of appears and reappears 3 or 4 times, and every time he's like, "Yeah, what is it now?"
Yeah.
And he says something like, "Oh, I'd like to explain this to my boss. I have a friend who's an amateur sleuth, and he had a bit of a heavy dinner the other night."
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very good. But he always kind of leaves the clinching evidence just as he's about to leave. He goes, "Oh, yeah, by the way," because he's trying to smash Jeff's bubble, isn't he? Did you notice also as well, there's only one time where we see something that James Stewart doesn't see. And I'd forgotten about this. We do actually see the wife. Did I remember that, or was I dreaming? We see Thorwald and his wife leaving the apartment together.
Correct. So there's a point in the voyeurism which Stewart is now really getting sucked in. He dozes off at 3 a.m. And then we, the audience, see Thorwald leave with his wife, presumably his wife, down the hallway. And he does not see that.
Yeah, that's it. So he chucks that one in, which is that was good stuff. There's one funny bit as well. This weird thing about Jeff's bachelor lifestyle. I said he almost seems like a teenager sometimes. And Lisa decides to stay over. I thought it was a nice touch that she sort of packed light, almost to impress him, to say,
Yes.
I'm not materialistic. I can pack with just a little suitcase, no problem. And then Jeff kind of has to check with his landlord that his girlfriend could stay over. Is that a thing in America? Or, I don't know.
Well, realistically, I mean, certain hotels didn't care, but it was a real thing. You see that it might be more of a film, what would you call it, a slight censorship with film where it was not proper for a woman to stay overnight at a man's place or for women to accept gentlemen callers. So that was a real thing.
Yeah, there's a kind of prudishness, you're right, in films at that time, yes.
Probably more for the audience's sake, for the film censorship's sake than it was in real life, I would imagine.
Yeah, I know. It always makes me laugh, though, the way audiences had to be protected in those days. As if, like, who has sex then? Like, if you don't see it, like, how do you think you got here? That kind of thing, there was a weird prudishness. So, yeah, Lisa is interested now. Then we get to really almost the key line of the whole story, delivered by Doyle. And that's a secret private world you're looking into there. People do lots of things that they couldn't possibly explain. And, he's right. So let me give you the slightly tough question. What are the ethics of spying on someone's apartment, even if you either prove that they didn't kill someone or you prove that they did? What do you reckon?
Well, I guess you can take it to an extreme. So Stewart is bored. He doesn't have much else to do. So I think it's forgivable that he is spying. He's spying because he does bring out the binoculars and then the long lens when he wants to find out if his hunches are correct or not. So I think, if I'm living in an apartment like that, if I leave my shades open, that's on me. I think there's a point where, like, you see Stewart, when they say, hey, the shades are open, he quickly turns his wheelchair to see immediately because he can't not take that in.
Yeah.
There he's getting a little bit too obsessive about it.
Yeah, obviously there's a bit of suspension of disbelief because you probably wouldn't have that good a view, to be honest. I don't know. I've never lived in one of those courtyards, so maybe you do.
But that's a good point. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, there's obviously a bit of a device going on. But I think I'd probably forgive him the long lens purely because he's got it there anyway, because he's a photographer. Maybe I shouldn't forgive him that, but I will. But yeah, the interesting ethical question really is that if you prove that a man killed his wife, then you are solving a crime, or you're helping the police solve a crime. Then you've got the idea of the government, of course, spying on us. I think people have always suspected that happened, but a few years ago, it came out, this thing about the potential to read emails, and people are now kind of realizing that Facebook and things like that, they are, I wouldn't say they're primarily set up to take people's data, but that's a big part of what they're doing, let's be honest, So rather than, solve it, I'll just leave it for the audience there, I think. This ethical thing, because the government, the famous line is, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear.
That used to work for me, but not as much anymore.
Well, we're kind of public figures now, aren't we? In this strange online world, we're kind of out there, aren't we?
We're putting ourselves out there, So
we are, yeah.
We get what we deserve.
One point I did want to make about this fascination with other people's lives. Have you ever been on a train and you look out the window and you pass 100 houses.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever think to yourself, all those stories, there's all those lives going on inside those houses? And I remember talking to someone about that. It's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, you just, in the world, I mean, how many hundreds, thousands of stories are going on that we don't know anything about, you know?
Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating. The theme I was sort of talking about earlier was this kind of thing about passively observing people's lives but not really getting involved. So there's a point where Doyle seems to have convinced them that there's no murder. Mm-hmm. And again, Grace Kelly has this great line, look at us sitting around with long faces, plunged into despair because we find out a man didn't kill his wife. You know, we should be happy. Yeah. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a great line. And that's, Hitchcock is checking, I guess, the feelings of the audience, because he's lured them in and we've become voyeurs. And then we have to check ourselves like Stewart and Grace Kelly do. They say, well, what we're seeing is not reality. You know, anything could be happening there. Let's take a step back.
Yeah.
So Stewart and Kelly do take the step back, but they step right back in, you know, very quickly after.
Yeah, they put the shutters down and then they hear a scream, and then obviously the dog has been killed. Strangled, I think. Yeah.
Strangled, yeah.
Oh, horrible. And then we get, you know, another really key part of the story, which is, like I said, we've got this couple and they send their dog down in a basket from the balcony, mm-hmm. and then the dog jumps back in the basket. So you got some comedy value.
Yes, and that couple sleeps outside on that porch because it's so warm in the summertime. And then at night it starts to rain. The rain becomes somewhat of a character in the film. You see them scrambling to get the mattress in, and the alarm clock falls 3 stories and the guy falls in. It's just some very good comic relief.
Yeah, well, this is Hitchcock, isn't it? I mean, I don't know if this is partly an editing thing, but he knows when to sucker the audience in and then deliver whatever he wants to deliver, you know. But I think as audiences, we love being manipulated.
I think that's very true. And then he gives us some breaks as well. You know, we get sucked in and then he gives us a breather and then he sucks you back in.
Absolutely, yeah. It's this sort of push and pull thing he's got going on. So then, yeah, this is really interesting. So all the neighbours are getting on with whatever they're doing. I think the songwriter's having a party or something. And suddenly they hear the scream, and then, of course, everybody does what you see people do in the street. Everybody just starts gawping, as we'd say in England. Mm. Everyone just starts looking. They don't really help. They don't get involved. They just have this instinct to look. And this woman just starts screaming at the neighbours, and some of the lines are great. You know, real neighbours like each other, speak to each other. They care if anyone lives or dies. And she's got this wonderful New York accent as well. I thought that was great. Mm-hmm. So this idea we have now that particularly in cities, people don't really have anything to do with their neighbours, and this kind of private world, do you think it's going against human nature? I mean, by nature, we're gregarious, aren't we?
Yeah, I think so. I think most people need people, and I think that's why cities have emerged. It took a lot longer time for suburbs to emerge, and then as things spread out, you have people that like more space and more privacy. I think in the city, you can get a fair amount of privacy, but I've always liked the hustle and bustle and the energy of a city. Mm. And you can still get all that and still be extremely private.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the idea, I grew up in what I would call an old suburb, and there was great community there.
Yeah.
Because it was suburban enough, but yet it had its own, it was a city, a small city of about 20,000. And that was a community. So you start getting much bigger. The community seems to go away. The pockets of those communities are much more narrow, you know.
Yeah.
Like in the case of this film, I mean, Greenwich Village is pretty highly populated. The arts community, what a vibrant place to be in the 50s. Man, what a great place to be. But, you know, Stewart likes it there. He could afford to live in a nicer place, but he chooses to live in, I guess, the artistic area of the city or the ethnic area, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I've kind of always done the same, actually. I think if I lived in a rich area, not that I can afford to, but I think if I ever did, I'd be bored, to be honest. I like these kind of earthy, I don't know, more working class districts, I suppose. I've always lived in those places in London, you know. Mm-hmm. There's just a bit more going on, and I don't know, it's a bit less predictable. I don't know. It's funny, isn't it? Because this is, if you believe the depiction of Greenwich Village, I mean, this is about 7 or 8 years before Bob Dylan turns up. And
correct.
You can't quite imagine, I don't know, James Stewart and Bob Dylan in the same, I mean, James Stewart's character.
Well,
Bob Dylan.
That's the Hollywood element of 1950s filmmaking, which looks When I say it looks Technicolor, I mean, it looks unrealistic. So it probably wasn't quite that colorful.
Yeah. I mean, a bit of artistic license, obviously, but we kind of love that as well. Just to go back to that thing about, you were saying about community, it's very easy, though, to lose that. And then maybe people do start to get a bit obsessive about their privacy. And maybe I've become a bit guilty of that because I grew up, not a very small town, it's probably about 50,000 people. But I used to know all my neighbours, and the old cliche of, leaving your back door open and stuff. We had a bit of that where I grew up, but I seem to have been really conditioned out of that. And I think having the online option as well, I would love to meet you in person. I really genuinely hope we meet in person.
Yeah.
But it's quite possible we could go our whole lives. We could do 100 podcasts together and never meet. It's a strange world now because the online option gives you that option of meeting, but at this weird distance. But I guess we're in different countries, we're quite far away from each other, so that explains some of it.
Yeah, I've got a side business with a guy I met online about 12 years ago. And we only met once in person one evening because I was on a business trip in his area. We've never met other than that one time. We've been in business together for 12 years. So it's really kind of funny how the community I have with him is just that. I mean, it's a very small, narrow community.
That seems very strange because you could have quite a close relationship. It's a bit like radio in a way, isn't it?
There's so much more that the eyes pick up. There's quite a lot of information there with sight that I rely on. Yeah,
definitely. Okay, so where have we got to? We're getting towards the end of the plot here. So there's a point where Lisa and Stella, the nurse, kind of take over. I think Jeff notices something about the earth where the dog was sniffing around. Jeff writes Lars Thorwald, who's the salesman, writes him a note, and Lisa sends it. And as we said earlier, Lisa's really getting into it now. She's found something, and I think she's genuinely into it. She's not just doing it to win James Stewart's heart. And we get this nice thing that we've obviously seen in loads of films where she delivers the note. I guess she puts it under the door or something, and then you see Thorwald come towards the door. Kind of like a two-shot, but with two people doing two different things. And I'm not sure whether that had really been done too many times. It's hard to say, but it's obviously been done a lot since. And we get this great shot where Lisa comes back and she's very excited, and then you get this great shot of James Stewart just looking really like, oh, wow, I like this girl now.
He's like looking at her lovingly with a very content, relaxed love because she is joining him in his adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. So then Jeff calls him up, lures him out of his apartment, and then I think Lisa was supposed to climb up, but then she climbs into his window into the apartment, and Jeff's like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. And while this is all going on, we got this kind of subplot with Miss Lonely Hearts, who started off having imaginary dinners, if you remember that.
Yeah, if I could just interject here.
Of course, yeah.
One of my favorite scenes in all of films is the one you just mentioned. So as Jimmy Stewart is getting to know his neighbors by just watching them, there's a beautiful scene where Lisa brings dinner for him, and they're not getting along very well. Lisa's setting up for dinner, and James Stewart is looking out the window, and Miss Lonely Hearts is having this imaginary date, and she's sitting down and pouring wine for him, and she's picking up the glass to toast her date, and Stewart is kind of doing the same. He toasts her. She's not drinking alone, but she's drinking with a man who's toasting her back. And Hitchcock does this with no dialogue. And you see Lisa setting up the table behind Stewart as you cut back to Stewart. So it's just a wonderful piece of filmmaking. And Miss Lonely Hearts then just realizes the folly of her fantasy and just starts crying.
Yeah, it's just really touching. And I think later on she brings a young guy back, and he comes on a bit strong.
Yeah, well, when she does start crying, that's when, James Stewart kind of gets self-conscious. He says, maybe Doyle was right. Some of that is private stuff out there that we're looking at. And he just encroached on it, and he's aware of it. But he watches her again in the scenario you just described with the young guy.
Yeah, I feel like if he could help any of them, he probably would. Well, I was going to say he's a hero of the film, but I suppose Lisa and Stella almost turn out to be the heroines of the film in a way. But he seems like an all right guy. He's a bit voyeuristic, but he's a photographer. And actually, I was having a talk on my John Lennon podcast about Fred Seaman. You obviously know him. people that don't know, he was John Lennon's personal assistant in the last couple of years of John Lennon's life. And he was apparently making a diary while he was there. But then it turned out he was a journalism major. And my guest on that show was saying that when 9/11 happened, she had a boyfriend at that time who was a film major, and he started filming it. And this is something we've actually touched on the other podcast. He wasn't filming it because he thought it was a nice thing that was happening. Absolutely not. But there's an instinct. And of course, we kind of need journalists and photographers because over the years they've taken amazing photos that have given us snapshots of major events, you know?
Yeah, I think people need to record history, and some people maybe need it more. Or I think they realize that something important is going on in front of their eyes and they want to record it in some fashion. I think Seaman may have realized maybe it's more of his work to write a book, but in the case of the 9/11 thing, obviously that was something spectacular going on. You know, the instinct is maybe record it.
I mean, if you're studying film, like I say, it's just kind of an instinct. Go back to Miss Lonely Hearts. Yeah, so she's had this bad experience with this young guy, and she's going to kill herself, and she stopped from it by listening to the songwriter who's finished his song or is on the way to finishing it. Mm-hmm. And that was a lovely moment. Yeah, so they kind of got this subplot right in the middle. I think it's even just as Lisa's going in the apartment, if I remember it right.
So Jeff and Stella get involved with Miss Lonely Hearts here because they are looking through the long focus lens, and she lays out these pills. And Stella, being a nurse, knows what those pills are. She's like, oh, call the police because she's going to kill herself. Yeah. So the police get called. And as he's waiting for the police to respond, Lisa gets caught in the apartment by the bad guy. And he starts to assault her, essentially. And that's how the cops, he's already on the phone with the cops who said, get here quickly. You know, woman in the back, he gives the address. A lot going on in that little couple minutes there.
If you notice, the police arrived in literally about 20 seconds. But that's very clever what you said, because they're actually called for a different reason.
Because there's no way the cops could have responded and saved her. So having the cops called in advance on another issue, they're already on their way. That worked perfectly. But, you know, in the 50s, the cops probably turned up a little earlier now than these days.
Yeah, about 20 seconds? Yeah, anyway.
Was it 20? I didn't count.
Oh, I don't know, yeah, something like that. No, but that's that thing that films do, isn't it? Someone will come to someone's house or something and have a cup of tea, and then you realise it's actually about 2 minutes of screen time, and then they leave. So it's a kind of clever thing they do of playing with time. But I think we're so suckered in's not the right word, drawn into this plot, that good filmmaking can kind of get away with anything almost, you know. So yeah, as you said, Lars Thorwald sees her, and then they do this other clever thing where you see Grace Kelly pointing to the wedding ring, and James Stewart's got the long lens, and then Thorwald sees her and then sees James Stewart. Then he appears in James Stewart's apartment. Another thing that's quite funny, a bit of a suspension of disbelief, he can just walk into James Stewart's apartment.
Well, you know, one of the things I did notice, having seen this film many times, is that apartment is often left open because he can't walk up and lock it. So people don't know. And, I mean, I would never leave apartment unlocked in Greenwich Village, even in the 50s, but it looked like he did, because Lisa would just walk in. She didn't have a key. Yeah,
I mean, joking aside of what I was saying earlier, I remember when I was a kid, we did leave our door unlocked, and probably not when everyone was out. I think that's a different thing. We'd have it unlocked when we were in, and people would just come in, the neighbours and stuff. But yeah, I can't imagine that ever happening now. So Thorwald comes in. I thought this was quite interesting. James Stewart's almost using the flashbulb to defend himself.
Yes.
That was a really interesting idea. I don't know who came up with that.
I had a little bit of a problem with that. I mean, it seemed like if I'm Lars Thorwald, I'm just going to bull rush him. But the flashbulb does a couple things. It stalls the bad guy briefly here and there. And it also is bright light showing into the courtyard, which is where Lisa and the cops end up coming. Yeah. So it's also kind of an alarm. So it has a couple different purposes. And, Thorwald does get him anyway. And then obviously Stewart nearly gets killed for his efforts. But the point in the film where Thorwald knows he's being watched, he knows who's watching him. And then Thorwald turns the tables on Stewart and goes after Stewart, not knowing that he's incapacitated or in a wheelchair, unable to move. So it was really kind of interesting how those tables got turned.
There's one bit I really loved where he's called Thorwald and he says, did you get my note and everything? And then James Stewart's phone rings, and he thinks it's Doyle. No, sorry, he's just called Doyle. And his phone rings. He says, "Doyle, I think he's gonna." And then there's that really tense silence because you realise Thorwald's on the other end of the line. But it's when he suddenly realises and it all goes quiet. That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. That was interesting what you said with the red light because, again, I was watching it last night and that flashbulb, that sort of red light that goes off, that was a device they just put in there, but it works as an alarm. That's very clever. I wonder if they meant to do that. They must have chosen it for that reason.
And I think when that red light, in other words, Lars Thorwald is seeing a red light because he's blinded by a bright white light. And the result is this kind of blinding redness that he can't, it stops him in his tracks briefly. Yeah. So that was pretty cool.
That's a really cool effect. So Thorwald attacks Jimmy Stewart. The police pull him off. Jimmy Stewart falls. He kind of gets half caught. Mm-hmm. And then we're at the end. And then he says to Lisa, you know, I'm proud of you. It's a nice line because he's very impressed by everything she's done, climbing into the bad guy's apartment. And then Hitchcock does a thing which he very often does, even in a film that has dark elements. He gives you a little bit of lightness at the end. So we see Jeff has now got 2 broken legs. And we do this thing where Lisa is pretending to read an adventure book and then switches to Vanity Fair, I think it is. Mm-hmm. And I didn't notice as well, the song playing, is that Lisa or is it Mona Lisa? Is that the same song?
I think it's an original song called Lisa.
Well, that's right. Because there's Mona Lisa earlier, which I'd forgotten about.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's it really. Now, one of the things that we talk about sometimes, and I appear on another couple of podcasts, and when we do old films, we always talk about, in those days when people didn't have video recorders and there was no, obviously this is 60 years or 50 years before podcasts, I don't imagine that people really reflected on the film in terms of, say, what the future might be. But in this age where we do like to overanalyze, obviously in those days, you know, this would have been a great night out at the cinema because you get suspense, you get comedy, and then you get a nice ending, so everyone's happy. But what do you think might happen with Jeff and Lisa?
Well,
pure speculation.
It is left open. Obviously, it's a happy ending. They get the bad guy. James Stewart is in Lisa's arms, I think, as I recall. And it seems like the relationship would carry forward, but whether they would marry or not, I don't know. If you project a year forward, are they just back to, you know, he's off in Budapest or Cairo with doing all these magazine photography, and I still don't see how she could go with him. I mean, she did show that she is up for some adventure. She proved that in the film, and he would have to prove that maybe he can go into her world a little bit, meeting her halfway.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Meeting in the middle, yeah. I mean, I like to think people can change. You know, I've seen huge changes in people, and I wonder if we're a little bit conditioned to think that we are stuck in we're stuck in the class that we're born into, particularly in England. It's much stronger in England than America. Yeah,
I've always understood that. That's not so here. I mean, there's a lot more flexibility between the classes here, and anything can happen, and it does.
I mean, it is a lot better. It's changed a lot in England. I mean, in the 50s, it was just terrible. I mean, you had your place and that was it. But there's a bit more flexibility now. Any final takeaways? I think we've done it a bit of justice here.
Yeah, one of the things on the last point you made, and we didn't really talk about this, is that every single apartment that James Stewart is looking into across the courtyard is a potential scenario for him and Lisa. So you've got the newlywed couple, the insatiable sex that the wife wants. You've got, and on the other spectrum, you've got Lars Thorwald who kills his wife. You've got the childless couple on the 3rd floor. You've got the composer who's unmarried, and then on the opposite end, you've got Miss Torso, who's the young dancer, beautiful, who's not attached, and all these guys are after her. So I always thought that was a real fascinating way that Hitchcock showed us the scenarios where Jeff and Lisa could potentially be in. And I have no idea where they would wind up.
That's really interesting, yeah. Does Miss Torso have a boyfriend who's been away or something? And yes. He's a lot shorter than her, isn't he? Yeah, there's a bit of a comic relief.
Another bit of comedy. You've got all these men, distinguished men, going after the beautiful blonde who's a dancer. And she's not interested in any of them. And we find out in the end it's this little 5'5" guy comes over from the army, and she's loved him. Oh, Stanley.
I love that, yeah.
She's in love with Stanley.
I think Miss Lonely Hearts gets together with a songwriter.
Yeah, he's playing the record for her. You have no idea how much this music has meant to me. not knowing maybe that it saved her life.
Yeah, it's nice because it's not too schmaltzy, because unfortunately the kind of Richard Curtis era, of those British films like Love Actually, which isn't bad, and Yesterday, I have a great fondness for that one.
Yeah, because as the scenarios play out across the courtyard, the composer and Miss Lonely Hearts get together, but you have the newlyweds. They're already arguing because the wife says, well, had I known you lost your job, I don't know, we would have got married. He's like, oh, honey. And then you've got the childless couple with the dog. They get the new dog.
Yeah.
So it's all these things going on.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. It doesn't just wrap everything up in a parcel, because I think those kind of Richard Curtis written ones, those British films, it's just a bit too neat in the end.
Yeah. This does it. It's neat in the end, but it does it in a humorous way, which Hitchcock completely gets away with.
Yeah. But you're right. I hadn't thought about that those lives, that could be the way they end up. There was talk of a sequel. I don't know if they were actually going to do it, or someone had the idea that years later Grace Kelly kills James Stewart, and someone's watching her from the apartment. It's not a bad idea, yeah. Not bad at all.
Well, the storyline that people have connected is actually the movie that came out prior to this with Grace Kelly and Ray Milland, which is Dial M for Murder, which the broken down tennis star does plan to do away with his younger wife. So there some people have suggested, well, would James Stewart have become that character where eventually he would have wanted to get rid of her? Maybe not murder her, but...
Interesting, yeah. There was a remake of this with Christopher Reeve. Of course, I guess a lot of people would know, tragically fell from a horse and was paralyzed from the neck down. Awful. And then they... I thought it was really a nice gesture, so they remade the film with him, obviously in his wheelchair, for real, playing the James Stewart character. Have you seen that one? Or?
No, I typically stay away from remakes of that sort. Remakes in general, and typically just don't bother. And I hadn't heard too much about that one. That was a made-for-television movie, I believe.
Yeah, I think it is available. I might just watch, 10 minutes of it just for curiosity. But yeah, I know what you mean, because there was a remake of 12 Angry Men, which is really one of my all-time. I have a flick chart now, which has got about 1,500 films. I think that's about number 20 or something. So that's well up there with my favourites. And they remade it, and it's not too bad. I mean, they had George C. Scott, and he's always going to be quite good, but it just seems unnecessary. But I think it was a nice gesture in this case, I think it was made as a gesture to Christopher Reeve, presumably.
I think so too, yeah.
But I mean, this is really perfection almost, isn't it? I mean, the original.
Yeah, I mean, the script, there's not one word wasted. I mean, every camera movement is necessary, and it tells more than if the camera didn't move. It's just a brilliant film, and it's about, I forget the time. Hold on, let me check here. That's the one thing I like about some of these older movies is it's 112 minutes. It can pack a lot of punch in a relatively short time. Movies today like this, they're past 2.5 hours. To just find that self-indulgent, I think it's holding the audience hostage too long. You should be able to say what you have to say in about 2 hours, I mean.
Pretty economical, yeah. All right, and the last thing I wanted to say was to do with award nominations. Now, Hitchcock famously never won a Best Director Oscar. He got an honorary one, which nowadays is seen as a token. It's like a pat on the back. Well done, son.
Hitchcock was not impressed with that.
Really? Is that right? I've never seen I'm sure there's footage of it, but...
Yeah, he was not really thrilled to be there for that.
Right. Anyway, this film got, so he was nominated, adapted screenplay, and we should point out, in fact, this was based on a short story that didn't have any of the love interest and also didn't have any of the characters, Miss Torso, Miss Lonely Hearts, etc.
True. Yeah, like many of Hitchcock's films, it was based on a true story, or part of it was the germination for the film. The story, it was called It Had to Be Murder by Cornell Woolrich.
That's it. And a screenplay, John Michael Hayes. And it was nominated for cinematography and sound. I did hear actually on one of the documentaries that a lot of people thought that Hitchcock in reality could have had screenwriting credits as well for a lot of his films, but he just never bothered trying to claim that. He was very involved.
In the editing as well, I mean, the way he shot films, you could only edit them one way because his background was as an illustrator. So he was a storyboard guy. So he had everything really nailed down.
Yes.
And as a guy who I myself do video production, when I do that, I mean, it really moves things along quickly, and it's a really great way to make film because everything's so thought out.
Yeah, apparently he was very, very well prepared, and they didn't have a lot. the stuff they didn't use was almost nothing. I think it was like one reel. It should have been 10 minutes in those days.
Pretty much, yeah.
Because you hear about a lot of films. The most extreme example is probably Apocalypse Now. I'd see all that footage. Same with Get Back, as we were saying.
Yeah.
I was kind of joking when I said Get Back was too short, 8 hours, but
no, I know.
Only half joking. Why do you think Hitchcock never won a Best Director Oscar then?
Well, my understanding is the thriller suspense film, I suppose this comes from the 30s through the 40s, it was in America anyway, it was never viewed. It was a little bit like pulp writing, or it was a little bit looked down upon. And I do know that there was the film Saboteur from 1942. The original people he wanted were Gary Cooper and Barbara Stanwyck. And they very politely stepped down from that and, were happy to do their more romantic comedies, I suppose, which had more prestige. So I think the genre of suspense was built up by Hitchcock himself, and by the mid-50s, it had built up to where he did get nominated for this. He was only nominated for 5 films. I'm going to rattle them off here.
Yeah, go.
Rebecca in 1940, Lifeboat 44, Spellbound in 1945, Rear Window in 54, and then Psycho in 1960, losing every time. And in 54, he lost to Elia Kazan for On the Waterfront, which really swept a lot of the Oscars that year. So he always had, if you look, he always had great competition, but never could bring it home.
That's interesting, because I don't really like Spellbound at all, and I don't like Lifeboat particularly. They're not bad.
I like Lifeboat. I think, it's a war film. Or is it? But Spellbound, I think, is one of his weaker films. My favorite part is the Salvador Dali dream sequence, which I wish had been, his original vision was way more complex. I wish he could have done that, but I'm not a big Gregory Peck fan, and I think he's not a good Hitchcock leading man.
Yeah, I think in those days, psychology and, psychiatry, if you like, the analysis of things wasn't what it is now. It was very, very unsophisticated, although I think Hitchcock was a master of human psychology. I don't know where he got it from, but he seemed...
that Catholic upbringing.
Maybe. Have you ever read any books about Alfred Hitchcock, any biographies?
Yeah, a guy by the name of Donald Spottle wrote a biography on him, which I read many years ago.
That's it, the Dark Side of Genius, isn't that one?
Dark Side of Genius. The book, The Art of Alfred Hitchcock is one also by Spottle that goes into every film. Read that. The one I would recommend to everybody who's a Hitchcock fan is Francois Truffaut, who over 10 years recorded Hitchcock and interviewed him. Hitchcock very seldom allowed interviews, and Truffaut was a fan, and he developed a relationship with Hitchcock and recorded audio recordings of him over 10 years, and it was put into this book.
I think I've heard the audio version of that. Maybe not it's the whole book, but a good few hours, yeah.
Another one here, The Silent Scream, Alfred Hitchcock's soundtrack. It's by Elizabeth Weiss. This is a book that's out of print, but it's on his soundtracks and the music that he brought.
Yeah. Oh, we forgot to mention his cameo, of course.
Oh, yeah.
What's he doing? He's in the musician's apartment. What's he doing?
Yeah, so the composer is writing, and the composer looks back at Hitchcock, who's adjusting a clock on the mantle or something. They're talking.
That's it.
Now, the actor that plays the composer is Ross Bagdasarian. For those people who are familiar with the Chipmunks, that's the guy who started the Chipmunks, believe it or not. So that's the guy in the film.
Don't think about that too much when you're watching Rear Window, because that'll break the illusion a bit. But no, the Hitchcock cameos are fantastic because it's a little bit risky in a way, because you could really lose the film. Did he tend to put himself in there quite early? I feel like he did. Because obviously, if you're having this sort of this plot and we're really invested an hour and a half in, and suddenly he turns up, that would. Yeah,
this is as late as he turns up. This particular one in Rear Window is as late as he probably turns up, and it's halfway through the picture, and most people miss him because it's so innocuous. But let's turn up like in the first, in some cases, very first scene.
Yeah, I think on YouTube someone's done a compilation of all his cameos, so that's worth watching. One of my favourite ones, actually, Strangers on a Train. Obviously, you've got this duel thing, with the two murders. Mm-hmm. There's lots of motifs of, you even see the tracks, the railway tracks crisscrossing, which is really clever. Mm-hmm. And then as Guy, who's Farley Granger's getting off the train, Hitchcock's getting on, he's carrying a double bass.
Yes.
I thought it was fantastic, carrying on the...
And Hitchcock, It's usually a slightly humorous thing that he's doing, whether he's walking a dog or it's a slight bit of humor, which is always nice as well.
Yeah, but it's important. It's important to put it at the beginning because, like I say, even in this film as well, when James Stewart's watching The Neighbours, it's quite comedic to begin with. I think with suspense, what I've learned a bit from Hitchcock is you've got to sucker the audience in, give them a sort of a false sense of security. Just one more example, in Rope, I think he turns up right at the beginning because Rope, of course, begins with the strangulation.
Yes, that Rope is similar to Rear Window in that it all happens really in one room or one apartment. Yeah. And Hitchcock in Rope appears underneath the opening credits. And he makes an interesting cameo on Lifeboat. But
what is it? Oh, tell me. What is it?
Well, I mean, he obviously that's another constrained set where the entire film takes place on a lifeboat. So how does Hitchcock make an appearance other, floating dead in the water, which was thought of, but he appears in a newspaper advertisement for losing weight.
I haven't seen that film for years. Yeah, and in Dial M, he turns up in a class reunion photo.
Yes,
he's a guy that Ray Milland hires to kill his wife. He knew him from university, so you see Hitchcock there. Very, very clever.
Yeah.
All right. I think we'll leave it there. Thanks for doing this. Maybe you had told me it was your favourite film of all time. I don't know. Obviously, we chose it because you liked it. But
yeah, it's my favourite film of all time. I've got many. Oh. This is just one that's very easy for me to say that.
I think you were saying you'd seen it on a big screen. I would like to do that. The closest I came, actually, I used to live in Madrid, and I was at the Modern Arts Art Gallery. And for some reason, I don't know why, but I was with some friends, and we went into a room, and it was playing on a big screen. Quite a big screen, anyway, like a flat screen. So I've had a bit of an experience of that, but hopefully it will come around again. I guess we've missed the, what would it be, 60th? I guess we might have to wait for the 70th anniversary. Oh.
Yeah, I remember seeing it on the big screen and noticing inside of his apartment, everything is so much bigger. So you see his apartment, it's like a guy's apartment. There's nothing fancy. It's a little more disheveled than what I see on the small screen. Because when you see it on the small screen and Grace Kelly's in it, she just fills so much of it with her beauty.
Yeah.
On the big screen, you can see more detail. Tell us a little bit more about Stewart.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks for doing this. Like I said, so your channel is Pop Goes to 60s. This is probably going to come out towards the end of March, maybe a couple of weeks. We're recording this on the 7th. What have you been doing on the channel recently, and what's coming up?
Well, we're in the aftermath of the Peter Jackson Get Back film, so I just did an album that never was that includes a lot more unreleased music from the Get Back sessions. Everybody's been obsessed with the length of the film and that we didn't get enough film. I'd say we didn't get enough music, so I did that. I'm going to be working on some other bands. One of the big series I'm going to do is going to be on the Byrds.
Yeah.
And got plenty more Beatles stuff coming. And a lot of more 60s band histories as well.
Excellent. I'll put a link in the show notes. We did like I said, we did a 3-parter on Get Back, which was lots of fun. Yeah, I'm having some Get Back fatigue at the moment. But
yeah, same here. I had that done for quite a while, but I had to get out the door. I just got it done, so I can take a break now.
All right, and I will definitely get you on in the future as well. We'll cook up something. Maybe we could do The Killing, that Kubrick one.
Yeah, I'd love that one.
Yeah, because I guess there's more obvious Kubrick ones to do, but I probably will never do The Shining just because there's my friend Rob Ager, you may have heard of. I mean, he does incredible film analysis, and everyone's done The Shining at this point, so I don't know what else I'd have to say about it.
I haven't listened to too many film podcasts, but as far as The Killing goes, nothing is as good as a film noir caper gone awry. Those are always...
No, they are, and I mean, Kubrick is unique in many ways, but just the span of genres. I mean, he didn't make that many films. It's sort of 13 or 14, depending if you include all the early ones. And I guess he made 2 war films, but other than that, almost every film is a different genre. And I love The Killing because it's got this commentary that you wouldn't expect. So it becomes almost like a documentary.
Yes, it does.
It's a very, very unique film. So I will get you on for that at some point in the future. And good luck with the channel, and all the best, and thanks again for doing this.
Thanks, Anthony. Appreciate it.
If you'd like to support my work across my 3 podcasts, which are Film Gold, Glass Onion on John Lennon, and Life and Life Only, go to buymeacoffee.com/Antony Rotunno, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly or yearly subscription, which will give you early access and bonus podcast content. Thanks again for listening.